Welcome to episode number 43 of Talking Mopars. On today's show, we have returning guest Jonny Mopar for another installment of Direct Connections. Johnny's a good buddy of mine, and sometimes we like to get together and just talk Mopars, and that's exactly what we did on this show. The language gets a little bit colorful, so if you have young ones, make sure they're wearing those earmuffs, alright? So, without further ado, if you are a Mopar enthusiast, then you are in the right place. Don't go anywhere. You're tuned into the best Mopar enthusiast-driven podcast on planet Earth. And I am your host, Chris Albrecht, better known as the Mopar Hunter, and this is Talking Mopars Direct Connections.
You're listening to Talking Mopars with the Mopar Hunter, your direct connection to all things Mopar.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again back on Talking Mopars, my friend and yours, Jonny Mopar. Jonny, welcome back to Talking Mopars, buddy. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It was fun last time. Look forward to doing it again.
Absolutely. Anytime. It's always a good time when we get myself and Jonny Mopar on. And, this was a last minute, Jonny reached out to me and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm trying to figure out what this week's podcast is going to be about." And he saved the day. So we're just going to talk Mopars and have a good time. So, Jonny, from what I understand, you have some trivia for me.
I do.
I'd like to kick it off and talk some trivia.
Right there.
Let's
Cool.
Drop some knowledge on these folks.
So my buddy John Jones, right, the guy that I got General Mayhem from, the guy that's painted my Coronet, he's the guy that painted my 72 Charger that I didn't want. Anyway, good buddy. He's a body and paint guy, awesome fabricator. He's had the privilege of working on Superbirds and Daytonas before. In fact, John's one of those kind of guys that can just build shit on his own, right? He doesn't need to buy the parts, and he won't spend the money. He'll build his own nose and wing and everything. Anyways, a buddy of his had a Superbird that he restored, he painted, and he took I guess like a stencil of all of the panels so that he can remake them, so like laid paper over the nose, let's say, stenciled it so he has the right dimensions so he could cut his own sheet metal and make his own nose cone, make his own wing, all the brackets and stuff like that. He's got all that stuff. But anyway, one of the cool things he told me that I never knew. Okay, so a 70 Superbird, the nose on that car, the fenders on that car are from you probably know this, 70 Coronet.
Coronet, yeah.
Right? They're Dodge Coronet fenders on there.
Yeah.
So if you were to follow the top edge of the fender as it gets to where the chrome bumper is, the very top of the fender kind of dips down to where, and then it flows into the bumper, the Bumblebee bumper, wraparound bumpers on each grill of a 70.
Okay, yeah.
I'm talking about the B now of a 70
okay.
Super B.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You had me confused there for a second, but I got you.
I'm sorry. Following. In fact, I kind of drew a sketch, so it's not going to be good for your guys that are just listening. Let's see if I can.
Let me see. What do you got here?
See if I can figure this out. Okay. So let me get my finger. So this is the fender. Right here, as it dips down, this is where the bumper would begin on a B. But on a Superbird, the nose comes off of that fender, and the very top tip of the fender is leaded. They leaded it so that the fender flows into the nose cone.
Oh.
Yeah. Now, if you own a Super B and you've restored one, you've sanded that fender down, you probably know that. But if you don't, like most of us don't have Superbirds. I'm sorry, Superbirds.
Sure.
You wouldn't know that. I never knew that. My buddy John told me about that.
Yeah.
And then at the Spring Fling car show here in California, it's the biggest Mopar show we have out here, which is small compared to the guys, like in the Midwest. But
sure,
there was a beautiful blue Superbird there. And I happened to be looking at this car, and I'm looking at that area of the fender to the nose cone. And on one side of the car, it flowed perfectly, like from the fender to the nose cone. And on the other side of the car, the tip of the fender like dipped down, like that fender had been replaced. That fender came off of a Coronet or Super B, not original to the Super Bird. So I was like, damn, freaking John knows this shit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I wasn't going to point it out to the owner because the car was already restored,
You would
but
have fooled me. That's
yeah. And it's so subtle. I mean, the distance you're talking is so tiny that, to the regular person that you wouldn't even know. You're so in awe looking at a Superbird, you would never notice something like that. But
for
yeah, it
sure.
was there.
Interesting. Wow. Now I'm
Yeah.
going to be looking at every Superbird, like biting
Yeah.
my tongue when oh, they didn't do it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
So
very interesting.
if we're live on Facebook, right? And there's
So
people out there or no?
I thought about this for a second and I was like, oh,
Okay.
we're both wearing headphones and my
Uh,
audio is only going through the headphones, so they wouldn't be able to hear us.
oh, all right.
So,
Okay.
folks, in case you're wondering what I'm talking about here, I was going to go live on Facebook and take your questions, but there's no audio that you guys would be able to hear. You'd only be able to hear me whenever I talk, so it would be kind of weird. So I'm going to have to figure something else out for that uh, the next time Johnny and I talk. But I thought it was going to be a good idea, and I was like, oh, that's not going to work. I was just thinking about it actually after we started. I was like, oh, they're not going to be able to hear it.
Yeah.
I
All right.
completely went over my head. I wasn't even thinking about that, but we'll figure it out next time.
Well, if there's anybody out there listening to this and they have a Superbird and they know this stuff, I think they should reach out to Chris and let him know, like, confirm or deny that this is true. I can't say for myself. I don't own a Superbird and I've never sanded a fender down on one to tell you, but John knows a lot of stuff and he's restored them, so he knows. So it'd be kind of interesting to get some confirmation from others that might have a Superbird.
Yeah, that's I never even I would the thought would have never even crossed my mind,
Right?
to
And
be
what
honest.
if you bought one next weekend and you're like, "Man, I gotta restore this thing, but this crushed fender, I have to replace it. I'll go find me a Coronet fender," and you restored it without letting that tip, the tip of the
Yeah,
fender in. That'd be terrible.
yeah,
So
that's
we might have saved
interesting.
somebody.
Yeah, yeah, that's gonna be something now that people are gonna when they see a bird, they're
You're
gonna
gonna
look at
look.
it. And,
Yeah, right.
yeah,
I
and I know
did.
there's a guy out there that's gonna be the jerk that's gonna be like, "Hey, this thing
This
isn't
fender.
original."
Yeah. Coronet fender, huh?
Yeah, yeah. That's
Oh,
wow. That'll I'm sure I know that there's a couple guys that have restoration shops that listen to this show because I've talked to them. So we'll see if they reach out. I don't know if they've ever worked on any birds, but I guess we'll find out.
be cool.
So yeah, those of you listening, if you know something about that, reach out to me and we'll talk about it again on the show. So
All right.
very cool. Yeah, that's really interesting. I never even God, it
Dude,
never would have crossed my mind.
it's just part of the crazy stuff. I mean, like, there's other stuff with those cars, like, you know, the Superbirds all had vinyl tops on them, to hide the plug in the back window, right?
Mm,
It's kind of a weird thing. And then the Daytonas, well, there's like supposedly one or two Daytonas that got vinyl tops, right? Uh,
really? I didn't know
yeah,
that.
yeah, I think there was one or two. I don't know. There's probably a lot of arguing back and forth whether they were, original from the factory or not, but or if they were added on later. But I've seen arguments and I've seen some pictures of them with vinyl tops. It's like one or two known to have them.
Interesting.
And
I'm
then,
gonna have to look that up.
yeah, be kind of interesting. And a segue to that, because I did talk to you about this. So around, I want to say it was around 2008, 2010. I work for it's a medical device company. I'm a technician on the line. I do line support stuff, right? And the supervisor of this line, I've been working with him for a while. We support the same line. He's the guy that's telling everybody what to do, but I don't report to him. I report to the engineering side of the production line, right? And then out of the blue one day, because he knows I like Mopars, it's no big secret. Everybody there knows what I'm into. It's usually T-shirts have got something on them.
Sure.
And he tells me one day, he goes, "You ever hear of a little place called Creative Industries?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Yeah, I've heard of Creative Industry." Like, to hear somebody, layman, like out of the Mopar world, even mention that, it's like that's such a small little niche, you know.
Yeah.
The average guy doesn't know what creative industry is about. If you're a Mopar person, you probably do, especially if you're into Daytonas, right?
Oh,
And
especially. I
right?
I don't know about the modern guys. I don't know if they know
Yeah.
much about that, but
Well, the older school guys for sure.
sure.
So this guy goes on to tell me that he goes, "Yeah, my best friend when I was a kid, his dad worked at Creative Industries as a painter. So like they would do all kinds of stuff, but they were the ones getting the Daytona. So I think when Chrysler would send them the cars, they would send them just the car, and then they were putting the nose and the wings on the car, and they were painting them to match the rest of the car, you know. And I think he said that I can't remember exactly. I don't know if it was another friend, but he was like in that area, Woodward Street. He told me, I can't remember if it was the same guy and somehow he was connected, but one of his buddies' dads worked at AMC, and he says, yeah, they would give us the keys to like the AMX and go out there on Woodward Street and just street race with it. And he's like, it was badass, and I'm just like, are you kidding me, man?
Yeah.
Like, what are the odds? This guy's older guy in California working on a production line with me. It's just a small world. It's crazy how, you know, if I went to Michigan or something like that, I'd probably be like, oh, okay, I can run into somebody, right? But being all the way out in California, it's like, I don't know, it's crazy. But yeah,
Yeah, of all the places too. It's like
yeah,
yeah, that's really cool. Very
yeah,
cool.
yeah, it was pretty awesome. He would say stuff like, yeah, they would bounce around, like he says, we work at Ford, him and his buddies, be like a circle of buddies. He's like, we worked there 1 year and then we moved on. So he'd be like, yep. One of us would go, hey, it's up. Hey, we're out of here. They'd all quit at the same day and they'd walk out and then they'd go work someplace else at another factory. It's like, you guys are crazy.
Yeah, that's
But
nuts.
yeah,
Gosh, what a cool place to work. Like I think about that a lot. Like a lot of the historical Mopar, like Dick Landy Industries,
yeah.
and there's just so many
Oh,
amazing places that existed then that don't exist now that are it's like,
yeah,
wow, that would be a really cool place to work in the heyday of,
yeah.
Mopars.
There was another guy I worked with. This would have been back in like probably between 92 94. Um, and he's older than me. He's I'd say now he's probably in his mid to late 50s now. But as a kid, I'm not sure. I think it was either as an intern or right out of school or while he was going to school, he worked at Keith Black. I mean, this guy was really sharp. He was a sharp engineer where I worked, but I mean, as a kid, he was working at Keith Black. In fact, I never saw the motor, but he had an aluminum block Keith Black Hemi that he got from working there. It's like, dude, how sweet would that be?
Was that like the yearly bonus is you get an aluminum Hemi?
I don't know. I don't know if he snuck it out the back door. I don't know if he bought it. I don't know if he worked it off. I have no idea. I didn't get into those kinds of questions. It was a long time ago, but and I've come across him a few times over the years. I haven't seen him in probably over 10 years now, but um, yeah, I always bring it up. It's like, you still got that Hemi? He's like, yeah, yeah. I got to find a car to put that in. Like maybe
Yeah,
a
mine.
Roadrunner.
Come
Yeah,
put it in mine.
right.
That's
Yeah,
funny.
be awesome.
Wow, see, some guys have all the luck?
Yeah, yeah.
I just I grew up in the wrong era, that's all there is to it. I say it all the time, but I still
Oh
hold
man.
true that I wish I could go back. Like, sometimes I'll watch the movie Two Lane Blacktop.
Mhm.
It's one of my favorites with the exception of I wish it was a Mopar, not a '55 Chevy.
Yeah,
But, I'll deal with it because 'cause it's got some really cool racing scenes. The
And then
first one in the opening credits, and then the drag race
yeah,
in the middle of the movie. They're just so
that
cool.
70 Chargers coming up and riding his bumper. Remember that?
You know what I need? I need to find a film company because I would love to rewrite that movie
Oh,
and
yeah,
do it all over again. But
that'd be
like,
cool.
obviously it would be a period piece because it would just
Yeah.
have to be redone. I'm like, okay, no Chevys this time. Let's do something else. But
Uh,
I love it. I think the story could be redone, and they're remaking every movie that has ever been made, so you might as well
yeah,
make a cult classic.
yeah, yeah.
But that's just another one of my pipe dreams that'll never happen.
Hey, you never know. You never know. The sucky thing is like some of the greats, like the Dukes of Hazzard, of course. I don't know. I grew up on that, so when you see the remakes of it, it's like God, they suck in comparison. Like I hate how they just change the characters, and change the storyline. I don't know. It's like, why can't you just like keep it wholesome, make it how it was, and just make it now, Or maybe it's the grandkids or the kids of Bo and Luke Duke or something like that. Uh,
That would be cool, actually.
yeah,
I like that idea.
yeah,
There's another movie that was one of my childhood favorites, and that was the Cannonball Run. Love the Cannonball movies, and I think they could. I
yeah,
think they could reimagine that movie or those movies, and kind of bring them up to date. Same type of premise though. I like the comedy aspect of it because sometimes you just need a fun, goofy movie that has some cars in it. And Fast and the
yeah,
Furious doesn't cut it for me. It was fun when I was 16, but
yeah,
now that I'm older, I'm like, the best part about the movie was the Charger. And
yeah,
sometimes they bring in the resto mod Mopars that are pretty cool, but
yeah,
other than that, it's like, okay, how much unrealistic action do I want to watch?
yeah, yeah.
Before it gets old, but
Yeah. Well, and it got more and more extreme. Like the first one was bad enough, right? It's like the fake blower,
mhm.
and then pulling the wheelie. It's like, but all right, I'll like it anyways.
Yeah.
And then it's like, then it kind of goes CGI after that, the later ones, and it's just like so extreme, racing through caves and stuff. It's like,
Yeah. Well, it was so disappointing to me for the first one because when they first see the Charger, Toretto's got the hood off of it or open,
oh
and you
yeah,
can see
the
that it's a
badass.
it's a Hemi, and you're
Yeah,
like, "Oh, wow, they actually got a Hemi Charger for this." I mean,
yeah,
obviously, it's completely custom, but, a blown Hemi, it's like, "Wow," and then you find out that, oh, that was just a prop,
yeah,
and they just used it for that one scene.
yeah,
It's like, as a Mopar guy, you're kinda crushed, and you're like, "What?"
yeah, yeah.
But it is what it is, but,
Hey, you know, um, man, I got another segue for you since
alright, let's
we're
go.
talking about this, and
Roll.
it's gonna touch on, since we're talking movies, touch a
Okay,
little bit on American Graffiti, and it's
okay,
gonna touch a little bit on Fast and the Furious.
okay.
Okay, so this could probably be its own episode if you want to cut it at the end, and then we could start another one or something. But so, all right, I'm cruising around. We lived in Romaland at the time. This is where I lived when uh, Freiberger came and got General Mayhem from me. So I lived around there. Um, that would have been around. We moved there around 2006. So between 2006 to 2012, I want to say it was probably closer to 2010 ish. But there's a 70 Roadrunner that I see around the corner, and it looks like it's B5 blue. It's pretty patinaed. Thought, oh man, that thing's cool. Should ask, see if it's for sale, right? But it just never worked out. And then the next time I see the car is sublime green. I'm like, holy shit, he painted it. Okay, I'm like, well, I already know it's more expensive than what I can afford. And I've always wanted to kind of bullshit with the guy, but it just never worked out. And it was never always there. It was just every now and then it would be parked in front of this house around the corner from my house, right? And then one day I'm getting gas at AMPM, and the freaking Roadrunner's in there, the Sublime Roadrunner sitting there. And oh, I'm sorry, Limelight, you know. We're gonna get Mopar guys pissed. Limelight. And so I start BSing with him. He's a pretty young guy. and talk about his car a little bit. And I don't know how we got on the subject, but he starts telling me that he goes, yeah, the Charger from the Fast and the Furious, that was our car. That was my dad's and my car, and we sold it to the studio. I think it was Universal Studio. We sold it to the studio. It was actually, he said it was actually I think it was a 383 car, bone stock. And he says they put the fake blower on the hood and stuff like that. So the car that actually got rolled was his car, or his dad's car. And I was like, oh, no shit. And I'm like, what a small world, right? And then I asked him where he lived, and he says, because I'm like, yeah, I see you around the corner, but it's not all the time. I go, do you live there? And he goes, no, it's a buddy of mine's house. I just come by and visit every now and then. And he's like, I live over here. And he describes this house, like, or where this house is. And I'm like, dude, I think I met your dad before from years ago, right? And he goes, yeah. And I said, did your dad used to have a 55 Chevy from American Graffiti, the Harrison Ford car? And then I go, did he have like a Rolls Royce that was supposedly one of the royalties car from England or something like that? And he goes, yeah, dude, that's my dad. That's our place. And I go, no shit. I'm like, so going way back in time, I'd found two Chargers out in Hemet, and somehow I can't remember how I got a hold of the guy, but he had a really bitchin' clean 68 with the 318 in it, and then he had a 69 that had a bunch of parts missing on it. So I bought the 69 Charger for $300. The other car, I think he wanted like, I want to say it was like $2,000 or something like that. It was really nice though. It was complete. Like this thing was missing nothing. All I had to do was get it running and drive it. And so, long story short, I dragged the 69 home. I think I worked something out with the guy where I had some parts that it was part of the trade. So I got the Charger really cheap. And I think he wanted to turn the 68 into a 69. And that's why the 69 was the parts car. He was going to cut the tail panel and take the parts off of the 69 to put on the 68, right? And I'm like, no, dude, don't do that. And I'd already cut up a 69 that I had gotten from some guy at work. If you saw pictures of it, it had like a missing front clip. The guy he cut the wheel wells out of it. It was black, rusty top. It was rusted through. Anyway, long story short, I cut that car up and I cut the tail panel off of it, right? And so that was one of the parts that I owed to this guy. But he'd never collect. He would always call me, every few months or so, and it was like, oh, this guy liked to just shoot the shit, and he was doing all the talking. But he was just sort of like he's keeping that little line going. He didn't want me to fade out. It's like I owed him those parts. So one day he calls me and he tells me, hey, I'm selling the 68 to this guy, and part of the deal was the parts that you owe me have to go to him. And I'm like, okay, cool. And so he asked if I could deliver them, and I'm like, sure, no big deal. So this guy lived in Romaland. I went to Romaland and I delivered these parts to this guy, which was this kid's dad. So in fact, like this kid that day when I delivered these parts was like one of the little kids running around in the yard. It's probably like, 6 or 7 years old or something like that. And here he is, like, a grown adult now. But he wanted to turn the car into a 69 and then paint it up like the General Lee. And I'm like, man, dude, that 68 is pretty freaking clean. Like, I like 68s. I would not cut it up and turn it into a 9, but whatever, it's his deal. So that day I'm there, he actually had a 70 painted up like the General Lee. And he was like, yeah, it's going to, I can't remember if it was going to Universal Studios or it was coming from Universal Studios. Whatever it was at Universal Studios as just a display car. And I'm like, of course, I was a lot younger, and I'm a huge Dukes of Hazzard fan. It's like, it's the wrong year. It's a 70.
Yeah.
It's like I can't imagine. Here you're gonna display a 70 Charger painted up like the General Lee. Like, I don't know. The hardcore guys are gonna know it's wrong.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah. So I'm kind of curious too if there's any listeners out there that were actually at Universal Studios and remember seeing a 70 General Lee there or not. That would be kind of a cool thing to confirm. But anyways, he start bullshitting with the guy, and he's like, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, let me show you something." And he takes me out back, and he's got this big barn, and inside is this '55 Chevy that is supposedly from American Graffiti. All black. It's bitchin' looking. Look badass. Like it looked like a street racer. Like the rear wheel well, I think, was arched and big fat tires and stuff. Now I don't know if it really was or not. You know, or if it might have been a clone. I'm not sure, but from what I remember, he was saying it was one of the original cars from the movie.
See, now
So,
I thought that the 55 from Two Lane Blacktop was actually used in American Graffiti.
oh, well, that's interesting.
I
I never heard
think
that.
I could be completely wrong here. There could be people listening that are yelling at their radio,
Yeah. You
but I
idiots.
swear there maybe I mean there was only 155 in that movie.
Yeah, but I know they
Yeah.
had a few cars because they rolled one. The one they rolled, I think, was just like it wasn't all hot rodded out. It was just kind of a plain Jane car.
Since we're not going live, now I'm curious. I'm gonna see real quick. Let's just go. That's what the power of Google, folks. Let's see here. American Graffiti. But don't you? I swear, Johnny, you were telling me that you have a bunch of CUDA stories to share with us. Everybody
I
thinks you're
do.
the charger guy, and you are. I mean, clearly,
Uh,
you just told us
yeah,
about two more chargers. Now,
yeah.
wait a sec. So the $300 charger that you were just talking about, you brought that one home, or the two? Oh, with the other one was a 68, right?
I brought home a '69. That was the $300 one. The
And you
'68.
talked and you talked about that one on the last show that we did together.
No, I've never talked about that one.
Oh,
That's
so
a
it was
different car.
another $300 charger that you got. Cool.
Yeah.
I, man, I need to either live where you're at or just send you money and have you go hunting for me because I just can't find the car
Well, I
that you
mean,
transported.
it's a
What
different
year was
world
that?
now, Chris.
What year was that, buddy?
What's that?
What year was it that you got that other charger, the $300 one?
Oh, shit. Well, I was living in Quail Valley at the time. So that would have been between 96 and 2000. Way after my first charger. Uh, but way before that $300 charger I did talk about. The one I bought for
See,
$300 and then I got my 72 with it.
see,
Yeah, and
now
then
I just grew up in the like when I was turning 16 was about 2000, 2001, and Washington must just have sucked for Mopars because I looked and there was nothing cheap like that because I would have never drove the little POS Honda Civic that I had. I would have drove a Charger or something cool,
yeah.
but there was nothing around for that cheap. I mean, I remember looking at I was really stuck on 67 through 69 Barracudas at the time, and right in high school, right around driving age. And I was looking, and my dad and I looked at a couple different projects, and they were right around the $3,000 range,
Mhm.
and a couple of them were basket cases, and there was one that we found in Ballard, Washington. I forget what classifieds we saw it in. I think I'm the one who found it, and my dad and I went and looked at it, and it was a faded primer black, and it had the Formula S emblems on it, 340S on the hood,
Nice.
and we're like, sweet, console shift automatic, and you know, even though it had faded primer on it, it looked pretty straight. Who knows what was really hiding under the paint, but pop the
Right.
hood, and my dad never got as deep into Mopars as I have now. So if I knew then what I know now, I would have checked the numbers on it to see if it was an original 340 car because the guy wanted 3 grand for it. And my dad was like, "Oh, is it a real 340?" He didn't know how to determine
Yeah.
if it was a 318 or a 340. And he kept telling me after we left because we didn't bring any cash. It was kind of, let's go take a look at it. And the car ran. Um, and he was telling me on the way home, he's like, it's probably a 318. And I was like, well, how do you know?
Yeah.
You know, and he couldn't really answer the question because he really didn't. He was just assuming that there's no way a 340, Formula S Barracuda, I think it was a 69, I think,
What
was
what
three
year
grand.
what year was this when you were looking at it?
Late 90s, early 2000s. So I was
Okay.
probably 14, 15 because I started driving in '01. That's when I turned 16. So yeah, it was before that because my dad drove us down there, and yeah, it would have to be the late '90s. But I
Okay.
mean, back then, back then, uh,
Yeah.
you know, it was really hard to find a running and driving Mopar. Most of the ones that were around were, you know, project
Yeah.
cars.
I don't know. I mean, I think I got lucky. Where we moved, we used to live in LA, and we moved out into Riverside County in 96. And I mean, when we moved out here, there was a Dodge dealership in Paris, California, which is like the biggest town to close to where my parents lived. And I'm thinking that it was probably there since the 60s, and it was just loading up the area full of Mopars because it's somewhat rural out here versus Los Angeles. Like when I was living in LA, there was a 69 Charger right around the block from our house. I would always drool all over. And of course, uh, it was close to when we were leaving because I think it was probably around 90. I'm sorry, 85. We moved out here in 86. I think I said 96, but it's 86 we moved out here. So around just before then, there was a 69 Charger green, um, not probably F8 green. And one day the car's got like a big old smack in the quarter panel, like a big crush, big pressure dent on it, right? Like I know it would have been no big deal just to crawl in the trunk and like kick it out with your feet, and most of that dent would have popped out, right? And my dad's neighbor friend knew the people that owned that Charger, and he came over and he was talking because my dad had already had the blue 68, so he bought that 68 in 1982. So anyways, he's like, "Hey, that green Charger over there, it got dent, and it's to them, it's like it's just not the same anymore because it got hit, and so they want to sell it." And well, how much? $600. Running, driving car. That car was driven daily. That car was a neighborhood car I saw all the time. It was always moving. It was always driving around. It was a daily driver, 318, beautiful car. And I freaking begged my dad, like, "Dad, for my first car, that would be the car, 69 Charger. Nah, it's got a big old dent in it. $600 is too much money." Just like, fuck, you know. And by then I
That's
was already, that was my goal in life, was to own a second gen Charger, It's like, it was being that close, that close. Like, "Dad, I'll do whatever. I'll work around the house. I'll work it off. Please, please." I begged him. He would not. He would not buy it. $600 was
wow.
just too much money back then, I guess. But
Definitely a different time.
yeah,
But if I know I talk to my dad all the time about, you know, if he could have bought some of the cars that he's ran across in the
yeah.
past.
Oh,
And I can tell that every time we talk about it, he just shakes his head because I mean he was telling me a story about his brother's friend who had a 70 Challenger RTSE, black on black, 4 speed, 446 pack car, and he wanted 5,500 for it back in the mid 80s. And that's one car that he still kicks himself over today. obviously $5,500. I was like, how much
That
that car's probably worth today.
y-
You know
yeah,
what I mean?
that was a grip of money back then, though.
Oh, yeah, it
Damn, that
was,
was a grip. Yeah,
mid '80s, and the Superbird in '93 for $18,500. That was another one that he lost out on because he
that's
went.
ridiculous.
I've told this story before. He went home to ask his wife for permission. Biggest mistake of his life,
Yeah,
and I mean, you know, I can't say that I wouldn't have done the same thing, but I can say that I wouldn't have done the same thing. But
yeah,
it's like, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and ask for forgiveness on this one, and I'm gonna buy
yeah,
the Superbird so nobody else buys it. But when you think about you know, I know that inflation is real, but 18,500 compared to some of the prices these Superbirds are going for these days,
yeah.
man, you know, it's insane.
Well, another segue for you. Uh, God, when was this? I think this was in the '90s sometime, but there was some guys that put on a Mopar car show at the drag strip in Las Vegas. Um, and this was before Mopars at the Strip. So
Okay.
everybody knows Mopars at the Strip, but this was like this was probably 5 years before that. It was way before that. Anyways, me and my buddy, it's like, yeah, let's go to Vegas. It'd be cool excuse, go to Vegas, go to the Mopar show, and then do the Vegas thing at night or whatever, right? And so we go there, and I shit you not, man, there was 3 Superbirds there, 3 of them, and 2 of them were for sale for $30,000 a piece. And I remember thinking to myself, like, that is such a lot of fucking money.
Oh
That
yeah.
is so. Sorry about the f bomb. uh, I thought it was a ridiculous amount of money.
Oh no.
Like who's got 30 grand? Who's gonna pay 30 grand for a Superbird? It's badass, but 30 grand. And now you see what they are today, and it's just like, oh, I wish I bought both of them.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen one $30,000 Superbird in my entire life, and it was back in high school. To graduate high school, at my high school anyway, I don't know what it's like these days or back when you were in school, but you had to do a senior project. And, you know, you knew about it as a freshman, and you knew that when you were a senior, you were going to have this project. So, of course, I wanted to do a car. And I was like, I'm going to find a Superbird the big dreams, freshman. So
Yeah, yeah,
I go online and I scour the internet and I find a Superbird. Now I'm hoping someone out there can validate this car was for sale because I don't remember what forum or wherever I found the car, but it was definitely online. It was an Alpine white 70 Superbird, obviously, and it was $30,000. And I'm trying to remember if it was in a fire, something crazy, but it was 30 grand. And man, I wanted that car, but I was a high school kid. My dad had a hard enough time buying me a $1,500 car. So I'm like, hey dad, what
yeah,
about this for the senior project? 30 grand.
yeah,
I
yeah.
was never a good salesman with my dad, or I would have had all the cool Mopars. I must have just sucked. That's why I don't sell cars today. But I I tried, and then I realized, yeah, you're not getting 30 grand to go buy a Project Superbird. And even then,
No,
even if he did for some miracle say, "Oh yeah, let's get it," it would probably still be in the garage, unrestored right
yeah.
now. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things.
Right. Like those $30,000 ones. I mean, that was so far out of reach. There's just no way. And to be honest with you, as cool as Superbirds are, for that kind of money, like, do you know how many Chargers I could own? At least back then,
At 300 bucks a
I
piece, yeah.
yeah, right. Have acres full of them. So, and that's where my priorities were. They were with Chargers. So it probably would have been different if a Daytona was there, but it was just, it was so far out of reach. It's just impossible. But, yeah. So going back to the neighborhood, the rural area, I think it was just like the planets aligned where I happen to live. It was kind of rural. I'd ride dirt bikes, and I would just go into the hills every day, get home from school, and just hit the hills and just go riding. And I had a friend up the street that had a dirt bike, so he would go riding with me, and we would just hit trails, ride for hours. So the first story, my e-body stories.
Yes.
I'd already bought the Chrysler, the 70 Chrysler, which was my first Mopar. Paid, I think it was $25 for it, right? I just took it apart just to see how an engine went together.
You
It was a
can't even
383.
buy a Mopar T-shirt for $25 these days. Okay, carry on.
That's true. That's true. So my second Mopar was this Cuda, a Barracuda, and riding way out there in the hills, and I'm riding down a dirt road, and I'm looking into this guy's yard. It's kind of similar to my first 68 Charger. There was a little bit of a hill or a knoll, and I could see the roof line of the car, and I could just see, I could kind of make out like the fenders and stuff, but I thought it was a Challenger when I saw it. It's just far enough away you couldn't really get a lot of detail. You couldn't see the whole car. But I'd ride by all the time, And then one day the guy's out there, and I decide, what the hell? I'll pull in. So I pulled in, stopped, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing with that car?" And he goes, "Oh, nothing. It was just, one of the family members' cars. He was driving it, and it just, I don't know if it quit running or they got another car or whatever. They just parked it there. And it had been sitting for years. So it'd been sitting probably over 10 years. Tires were flat. The thing was covered full of dirt. It had a side swipe down the passenger side, like a big crease from the fender through the door, through the quarter panel. But other than that, bitchin' car, rust-free, complete 318 Barracuda, goldish color, black interior, column shift." And talking to him and stuff, and I had no money. I'm probably, I think, around 16 years old or so. No job. I had to bum the $25 to get the Chrysler for my dad, right? And so I go, "Yeah, how much would you give me?" He goes, "I don't know, make an offer on it." And I can't remember the back and forth, but the settling price was $65. I paid $65 for this freaking 70 Barracuda.
Thanks
I'm
for
like,
listening to the show today, folks. So we'll see you next time. Jonny, you're killing me. One of these days,
this is a long time ago, man.
One of these days, I want you to write out all the cars you've ever bought for under $1,000. I want you to write out the whole list, total them all up, and I want to see how many cars and how much you paid and what the cars were. Because I think it'll make a lot of us cry. It'll make me cry for sure.
It's gonna make me cry because I'm gonna wish I had all these cars.
That's insane. You can't even buy a pair of NOS Barracuda emblems for $60 or $65.
Dude, this car, it was just a car to this guy. I mean, it was nothing. It meant nothing to him. Mopars were not, they didn't have any prestige to them. It was just a car, just like a Pinto or a Vega or a Caprice or whatever. Like to these guys, I mean, you didn't have Craigslist back then. Shit, I'm not even sure. I think Recycler was around, but it's not like today. If you have an old car today, people just know, even if it's a slant six 4-door Valiant, they think it's worth $1 million because they saw something on Barrett Jackson sell for $1 million, so they think it's worth a lot of money just because it's old. But back then, these cars were pushing, 15 years old or so. And it was just an old used up car that was worn out. So because it was rural out there, people didn't throw their shit away. They had, everybody had an acre, 2 acres of property, sometimes 5 acres of property. So when the car broke down, they just parked it in the yard and that's where it sat, and then 10 years, 15 years later, here's this kid hauling ass down the dirt road on a dirt bike, pulling into the yard asking if they want to get rid of that car, So,
hey, guy who sold Jonny the Barracuda, why didn't you just give it to him? What is $65, dude? You saw him ride in on a bike. You can just say, "Hey, just have the car, kid. You need it." $65.
yeah.
At that point, it's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
How about I just buy you lunch or something?" $65. Come on, dude. That's like,
hey, well, $65 was worth a lot more in the 80s
Yeah,
than it is today. That's for
I
sure.
guess you're right.
Yeah, so I ride home, and dude, like to get here, you know, it's rural, right? I have no idea how to find this place through paved streets. I'm just riding out in the hills. This is like some town on the other side somewhere, right? So I go home and tell my dad, it's like, I got to borrow, can you loan me $65? What do you need it for? I just bought a car. What? Yeah, I just bought a car. We need to go get it. Can you help me pull it home? Fine. He gives me the $65 and he's just going to work. I'm just going to work it off. Right. So we load into his 76 Dodge van and we hit these dirt roads going out through these trails. And there's some gnarly sections where it's like we're going through these sort of like washes coming up the other side. And the van is like spinning, it's peg legs spinning. Like, oh, come on, baby, make it, We get all the way out there. We throw a chain on it. No brakes. I think we changed a couple of tires on it and left the other tires flat so that it wouldn't roll into the van
Sure.
because there was no brakes. We just drug it. So just dragging it, the tires just. I mean, it was probably 5 miles from the house of just like raw terrain.
You dragged
Getting
it
it.
5 miles in the dirt?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Drug it all the way home.
Did your dad ever look at you and go, "Hey, kid, pick a car and let's just stay with one"?
Luckily, my dad was as bad or worse than me. So he had already had a bunch of his own cars and he was already dragging shit home. Like the Chrysler, when I bought the Chrysler, the guy also had a station wagon. I think it was like a 72 Plymouth Fury 3 station wagon. Big old tuna boat, right? This monstrosity. And he was selling that one too for $25. So my dad bought that car. That car sat in the yard for many years. I always thought about fixing it up. It had a 400 in it, but it never happened.
Yeah,
And
you
then,
were too preoccupied with all the charges you had.
yeah, that one was definitely a low priority.
God.
But yeah, so that's the CUDA story. Well, almost. That's the getting the CUDA story. The sad ending to that car was that there was a big field fire because it's rural out there. This big field fire came through my parents' property and it torched a bunch of cars. We had a bunch of cars. So we lost the Barracuda, completely burned to the ground. He had a Monte Carlo. I thought it was a 69, but I had posted pictures and some guy said it was a 70. So I don't know, 69 or 70 Monte Carlo burned to the ground. A friend of mine he moved to Washington, I think, and he was storing a 72 Charger at their place. The Charger burned to the ground. My dad had a 69 Plymouth Fury 3 police package. It was a civil defense car. Way, way cool car, man. It had Motorola radios in it. It had the spotlight on the A-pillar. I remember on the firewall, these huge fuses, just like a fuse box with these gigantic fuses for the radios on it. And it had I think it was is it a TNT or a Super Commando?
Plymouth would have been a
I think
Super
it was
Commando.
Yeah, it was a Super Commando. It had Super Commando. It had the dual snorkel on it.
Nice.
High performance 440 with the big manifolds on there. The hypo manifolds, which C bodies had fins on them, but bitchin'
I
car.
didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah, they have their own. I think it's just the driver's side. I think the passenger side is the same as any HP motor, but on the driver's side, I think it has like these extra fins cast into it. They're just for C bodies. But yeah, burned to the ground, unfortunately.
Oh, man.
The fire, my parents called me and told me about the fire. I came riding on my motorcycle, and the fire department had blocked, like where the paved street ended. So they were like up this dirt road and around, but I could see from where I was, I could see the house, and I could see the flames coming from the property next to it, and the flames were just like licking the corner of the house. And I thought, oh my God, the house is going to burn down. And fortunately, it never lit. The house never lit, but all down below, all the cars in that bottom low area just got torched, and the flames came all the way up. So my dad's 68 Blue Charger, the flames came all the way up to the car, like right next to the tire. There was actually like char on the fender of the car, but it didn't catch fire, didn't burn. I'm just like, it's the only car. I prayed to God, don't let that car catch fire, please. So, luckily it didn't happen. And I'm happy to say that I still have that car.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
But the CUDA met its demise, unfortunately.
Hey, that might have been God going, hey, we need to dial it back, dude. You've got one too many.
Yeah, you might be right.
I understand you like Chargers, so the Barracuda's got to go.
Yep, you got to give up something.
The old fried fish move. Oh, man.
Right.
It's tough hearing the stories about cars that burn down. Actually, now that you tell me your story, I know a couple guys that have had some catastrophic shop fires where they've lost cars. And
yeah,
I don't even know what I would do. That would be my luck, is I finally get the truck and the dart running, and I'm like, oh, we'll keep them in the garage for safekeeping, and something catches fire, and then I lose them both. That would be my luck. But
well, again, the segues.
Here we go.
So that'll bring me to my next e-body story. When I was living in Quail Valley, well, actually, go back further. Me and my buddy used to go out. There's this skydiving place called, it's Paris Skydiving. So in Paris, California, there's a big skydiving place there. And there was a bar. What the hell was the name of it? I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, we would go there all the time and drink and hang out, whatever, at this bar, right? And there was this house like up the street from this place, because it's pretty rural out there too. And I remember, I don't know if we were pulling in or if we were walking out, whatever the deal was. There's this rally, a 72 rally red Challenger sitting there, and a bunch of guys hanging out, and they had the hood up, and they're just bullshitting about the car, and the guy fired it up, and I was like, fuck, man, this thing sounds good. This 340 sounded really good. So anyways, long story short, years go by. I'm living in Quail Valley, which happens to be a few miles from where this skydiving place is. I happened to walk out of my house, and now my house was like a shack. It was just, I don't even know if you could call it a house, but I just walked out, and what do I hear rolling by? I'm like, man, this thing sounds good. It's the same freaking car. It's that 72 Rally Red Challenger. And I mean, I think I moved out there around 96. Yeah, it was about 96 or so. So this would have been, mid to late 90s when this car rolled by. Had drag light, weld wheels on it, bitchin' car. And I seen him a couple of times in the neighborhood. And I would go, because this is like another one of those little neighborhoods you're like going up and down the streets, and you're like checking everybody's yards to see what's parked in their yard, because everybody's got cars, And one day, 2 streets over from my house, I'm doing that. I'm just cruising by. I look over, and there's the car sitting next to this house, and it's burnt to the ground. And I'm like, oh my God, what the hell? So there's an old man out there. I pull in, and I'm like, what happened? And he's like, he goes, it's my son's car. He started dating this girl, and this girl's ex-boyfriend was jealous, got pissed. This guy's son, the owner of the Challenger, was parking the car at his dad's house here in Quail Valley so that nothing would happen to it. Somehow this guy, the ex-boyfriend, figured out where the car was, came over, threw a brick through the window, and set the car on fire, burned it to the ground. And I'm like, holy shit. I go, man, that car was badass. And he goes, he was freaking out. He's like, I got to get rid of this thing. Code enforcement's going to get on me, you know? And I'm like, uh, I'll take it. Like, I'm like, I go, well, how much do you want for it? And he goes, I just want it out of here. And I go, okay. And he goes, let me talk to my son first, because it's his son's car. So he called his son up, and one of the welds had got so hot it melted, but the other three were good. And so the son he wanted to keep the weld wheels. So he took the 3 good weld wheels off of it, and I just put rollers on it to get it home. And then I drug it home. But it got so hot, like there was nothing left on the interior. The roof was all warped and stuff. It had the bulge hood, and the bulge hood, it got so hot it warped, but I think it was savable. And then of course the drivetrain. So I don't remember if the tranny melted on it or not. It's too long ago, but I pulled the motor out of it. I was going to hold on to it and stuff, but then I just ended up selling. I just parted it out, but I got it for free, you know. And I think I got $500 for the 340, and I got like, is it $100 for the bulge hood? And then some guy in Vegas came all the way out in a rental car to buy the fenders off of it, because the fenders were still good and had the, that insert that goes on the fenders where the stripes go back on. Yeah, he bought the fenders. I think I sold them for a couple $100 or something like that. But so I made money on the car.
So Johnny gets a free Mopar and then hawks a bunch of parts and makes money. Oh,
yes. I did.
Man, that's rough. The guy's like, hey, keep the girl, but you're not having the girl and the car, dude.
Yeah.
Throwing salt on the wounds. I'm going to throw a brick through the windshield too and light it on fire. That's how much. God.
Man.
See, now that's a guy's move, though. A guy knows to really get the guy, you burn the car to the ground, you go after his car.
Exactly.
Those are fighting actions right there. That's means for revenge. It's like, hey, leave the car out of it, okay? But man.
So I'll tell you another Challenger story. Get all my e-body stories out, because I don't have many of them.
Okay, let's go.
So prior to this car and after the CUDA, my second job ever was working for Round Table Pizza right there in Paris, right? And there's this trailer park in there. There's this one trailer park we got a lot of calls to deliver pizza to. And one day I'm driving through there, and there's a 72 CUDA 340 car. And I'm like, holy shit, like totally restored, bitchin' looking car, And there's the house that it's, in front of. The garage was open. I could see like an engine. I could tell it's a small block Mopar on the engine stand, but nobody was in there. So I deliver the pizza and I drive by, and still nobody. It's like, all right, so I got to get back to work and get another delivery. And so every time I went there, first thing I do is beeline for that house and see if the guy was out and about. And he was a lot, because it was like the garage was open all the time. And finally, I'm driving by, delivered the pizza, I think, and I come back and he's in the garage. So I stop, bullshit with him. Cool guy. He was working on a 340 on the stand. He had the CUDA there. And so got to know the guy, and every time I delivered a pizza to that little trailer park, I would swing by his place, and if he was out, I'd stop and bullshit with him. I ended up buying a cherry picker from him one time. And then one time I go by there, and there's a black 70 Challenger sitting there, like a primer black Challenger. And got to bullshitting with him, and he's like, yeah, it's for sale, man. He goes, you should buy this car. And I'm like, dude, I would love to buy this car. And he goes, it's a pretty rare car. He goes, let's go for a ride. So I go, hell yeah, let's go. I'm working, I'm on the clock, but I'm still jumping into this Challenger with this guy. We're going around the block, and he's just, ripping into the car. I remember it had electrical problems, because they're like all the wiring was shot, and it had somebody just put all toggle switches. I mean, everything from ignition on, starter button, headlights, like everything was on a toggle switch, But the rest of the car was a bitchin' solid car. and he starts telling me that it's a pretty rare car. And I'm like, dude, I would love to buy this thing, but he wanted $600 for it. And working at Round Table Pizza, I think my paycheck for every 2 weeks was 200 at best. So you imagine, gas, food, I couldn't just save the $200 and not have to pay for gas and not have to pay for food and stuff like that. So it was like, it'd take me forever to save up $600 back then, And I go, I'm going to try. And he goes, I hope you buy it because there's another guy that wants the car. This would have been early 90s. This would have been between 1991 is probably when this was. This is after high school, graduated in 90, and it was before I worked in Temecula in 92. So 1991-ish. And he goes, the guy that wants to buy the car, he's going to just cut it up, and then he's going to part it out in the Midwest, because back then you couldn't get sheet metal. There was nobody made any sheet metal, and all the cars in the Midwest were already rusting out by then.
No auto metal
and so
direct. No auto metal direct.
Exactly. No nothing. No. Was it good?
Good Mark.
What's the other one? Good Mark. Yeah, I think Good Mark was the first that started popping Challenger parts, sheet metal. But back then you couldn't get it. So if you had an RT car, let's say, there's so many like 318 cars here on the West Coast that just got sacrificed. They were just cut up to save RT cars in the Midwest, beautiful, perfectly running cars. In fact, another segue for you. One of the boneyards, even then in the 90s, like it was hard. You'd be hard pressed to see a Challenger in a boneyard, right? But one day, sure as shit, I'm walking through the yard and there's a 70 Challenger. And you know what was left on this thing? It was a Alpine white car with a 318 in it. It was almost sad because everything was cut off of this car. Everything that can be unbolted from this car was gone. So like hood, fenders, glass, doors, deck lid, all the interior pieces, everything was gone from this car. The quarter panels were cut off of it. It was like the A-pillars coming up. I think part of the roof was there, or maybe all of the roof was there. And like, I think even sections of the floor were cut out of this car. Like there was nothing left. You could barely tell it was a Challenger. And this poor little 318, normally when they've got mileage on them, they're all greasy and grimy looking. Like this thing was practically clean. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it was clean, light blue, small block Mopar blue. And nobody bothered to take a single part off of that poor little motor. It still had its little 2-barrel on there. The exhaust manifolds were on it, valve covers. Everything was on this engine. Nobody wanted a single part off of the engine. But the rest of the car,
wow,
gone. Yeah. But so anyways, back to the Challenger. The Challenger was a 340 car. And I didn't realize it at the time. He told me it was a rally Challenger, which I always thought rally is 72 and 3.4, but he said it's a rally Challenger. And it wasn't until years later, one of John's friends, Mark, he's got a bunch of Mopars. This guy's got some cool stuff. But one of the cars he has is the same kind of car that this car was. It's a A66 code Rally Challenger, 1970 only. So it was a 340 car that it was like an RT. It had all the RT shit on it. It had the RT bulge hood. It had the 150 Speedo. It had everything that an RT would get, but because it was a small block, it didn't get the RT badge. So I think they made about just under 7,000 of these cars total.
I remember doing some research on them, but that was the one designation to know that it was a true 340 car that had all the RT options was the A66.
Right. Yeah. So I couldn't come up with the $600, man. So I assume that car got cut up and is part of a bunch of other Mopars out there in the Midwest somewhere.
See, now here's the strategy that I would have taken. I would have been like $600, that's reasonable, but let's go ahead and knock off $25 for each effing toggle switch you have in this thing. Oh,
Maybe I could smuggle out some pizzas too.
yeah. Extra pepperoni. Oh
Yeah.
man, that's rough. But hey, you can't have them all, Johnny. Sorry, buddy.
No, that was one that slipped away. The funny thing is I didn't know it at the time, but that guy, after comparing notes with one of my best friends, he's got a 69 Roadrunner. He still has to this day, and he's had it all the way back since high school. So his neighbor was this guy. This guy used to live in his same neighborhood, and he asked him, because my buddy was a Mopar guy, and his dad had Roadrunners, right? And he's like, hey, I got a 69 Roadrunner. Do you want to buy it? And my buddy Eric was like, hell yeah. How much? And it was like, I think it was $1,000. I think it was like $1,200 or $1,500. And so my buddy was like, I'm going to buy it. And then he was saving up the money to get the car off of him. Right. So every penny he got from work, he saved towards this car. And of course I'm like thinking, are you kidding me, dude? That's too much money. $1,000, I'm used to paying $100 or $200 for a car. So it seemed like a ridiculous price to me, but he wanted that car pretty bad. And he ended up saving the money up. And then I think the guy went through a divorce or something, and he was like, I gotta get it. I need to sell this car. I'm leaving the house. Like, what do you got so far? And I think my buddy had like $1,100 or $1,200. He didn't have the full price amount, but he was close. And he says, I'll take it. So he took the money, and my buddy's had that car since. But it's just funny. It was the same guy. So, and that had all happened in the late 80s, and then it was the early 90s when I met him, and almost when I met him and he had the Challenger. I'm not going to say I could have had it because it was just still too much money. I never had enough to buy it, but yeah, it's crazy. Small world.
Yeah, I've been running into that a lot lately, like people that know people that you're just like, how's that even possible? But
yeah.
All right, folks, that concludes part 1 of my conversation with my buddy Jonny Mopar. We talked Mopars for over 2 hours, so I decided to make this a 2-part episode. So you'll be getting part 2 next Monday, and I also wanted to mention that I feel silly about this, but in between my move from my old office into my new office / podcast studio, I seem to have mixed, I don't know how I did this, but I mixed together all of my shared Mopar stories that you guys submitted with all of the unshared stories that were submitted. So now I have to go through and figure out which stories I've already shared and which ones I still have left to share. So that's going to take me a few days at least, and I'm going to compile a list. That way I have all the people's names and stories, and this doesn't happen again. So my apologies to anybody who's still waiting for their story to be shared. It will be shared. Just give me a little bit of time. Give me another week or so, and we'll get back to the way things were. I know things are crazy in the world, and I guess they're crazy here too. I tried to prevent it, but I guess sometimes you just get wrapped up. So I'm going to take care of that. Until then, enjoy this episode. And part 2 will be out next Monday. So we will talk again next week. Same Mopar time, same Mopar channel. So there you have it, folks. Another episode of Talking Mopars is in the books. For more information about this podcast or to listen and subscribe to the show, please visit TalkingMopars.com. And don't forget that you can still send me your stories, questions, comments, complaints, suggestions, and everything else on your Mopar-addicted mind to Chris@TalkingMopars.com, or leave me a voice message on my voicemail box at 209-28-MOPAR to hear yourself on this show. We also have some merch in the Talking Mopars merch shop, where you can purchase cool things like t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, mugs, and more. So if you want to help support the show and get some cool stuff in return, jump on over to TalkingMopars.com and visit the shop. That's it, my friends. Until we talk again, I am your host, Chris Albrecht, and that was Talking Mopars, Direct Connections.
Thank you for listening to Talking Mopars, your direct connection to all things Mopar. Until next time, remember, no Mopar left behind.